Hello and welcome to the Value the Markets shareholder webinar. Today we're joined by Keith Driver, CEO of EarthRenew. This evening Keith will give us a short presentation about the company, and then afterwards we'll host a question and answer session. Now, we've received a few questions in advance from shareholders and interested investors, and I'll also have a number of questions to put to Keith about how he plans to take the business forward in 2020 and into 2021. So Keith, welcome today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Keith, today we're going to get a chance to listen to a short presentation from you. You'll talk us through EarthRenew, recent developments. You've had quite a lot of exciting news flow over the course of the summer. We'll also talk a bit about the company's funding moving forward and your plans for deployment of money that you've raised and how that will obviously deliver shareholder value. So we'll then go through a short question and answer session, but let's first of all begin with your presentation. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So EarthRenew is first and foremost a fertilizer company. We produce fertilizer products, and we call it growing for a better tomorrow. And what that means for us is we take manures from conventional livestock operations, and we turn those into high-value organic fertilizer products and solutions. There's really three problems that we solve. The first one we solve is for the livestock owner. They produce a lot of manure. They have to find a way of getting rid of that manure and finding value in that nutrient product. And typically they can't do that on site. They have to store it up and spread it a couple times a year so that they don't contaminate crops or put it on top of the snow where it just runs off. The second problem we solve is we take how do you dry that material? How do you convert it into a high-value organic fertilizer without using high-intensity greenhouse gas drying methods? And what we do there is we take the waste heat coming from power generation, and we use that to directly dry the manure and process it into a dry form where we can densify the nutrient value, turn it into a high-value product, and then mix it with other products to create solutions that the farmers can use. The third problem we solve is one of power generation, which is typically in these types of operations, we dry the manure and try and recover some of that heat to create power. We in fact do it the other way around. We create the power and then use the heat that comes off that to dry the manure, and that creates value for our site partners who have the manure, and it creates a product which is high enough in value that it's worth taking that product elsewhere. What it allows us to do, though, is that base product, that EarthRenew Grower ER formula, is a great base where we can mix in other micronutrients or other things that farmer may need and create a pellet that has value beyond, so that they don't have to do multiple passes to put down organic matter and nitrogen and other types of biopesticidals and otherwise. We can blend that all into a pellet. That provides multiple revenue streams for us, and it provides value to all those in the value chain. That's important for us, is creating that high-value product from a waste without creating an environmental footprint on that basis. The way the product flows, and if I can move on to the next slide, we take the manure that comes in, that's moved into the dryer. The dryer is running with the waste heat that we regulate coming off a power generation source, and that material is processed, mixed with other ingredients, and formed into what is that final organic pellet. That pellet is not an ingredient, which is largely how the organic supplement space is right now, where you buy, or a producer would buy many individual ingredients and then have to find some way to distribute them. We do that work for them, so they get a pellet that they can put right into the seed row. At the same time, we produce power at the facility. We can use some of that power to defray our costs, but at the same time, we can put that power into the power grid and get paid for it. So nominally, we end up with a very low cost of goods business on the fertilizer side, because our power generation revenues pay for the power that we produce plus the heat that we need to run the process. It's a very eco-friendly, but also very economic business model to drive it. The system as it's been built right now has been developed over the last 10 years and is at the point now where we've got a full commercial facility that we're looking to recommission and then move out to the market for the 2021 growing season. Next slide, please. So why do this? There's a couple of drivers. I'll speak to the one that's not on the slide first, which is the need to manage manures. The runoff from manure from large-scale livestock production contaminates watercourses. I'm sure we've all heard of recent issues with E. coli on vegetables, things like that. So if manure is placed in the field, there's a higher risk. If we process that manure into high-value fertilizer, we can get rid of those contaminants. So we solve that problem, and that allows livestock owners to manage their businesses more reliably and more sustainably on their end. Well, we then have a need for more food, and this COVID experience has really highlighted the importance of trusting and building strong supply chains for locally produced food. When supply chains break down, that means food become harder to get to market, and because it's all perishable, the system generally can struggle. So there's a higher need for organic fertilizers and soil amendments. We think about farming as mining the soil for its nutrients. There's a need to put back those nutrients back into the soil. The term right now is regenerative agriculture, where we're trying to regenerate that soil, get organic matter back into the soil, get nutrients back into the soil from natural sources that are long-lasting and not chemical fertilizers that can run off or volatilize and become greenhouse gases. When we look at the demand for organic fertilizer and food, on the other hand, that sort of pull side of the market, we see dramatic growth, particularly over the last 6 to 12 months, where we're seeing folks look at the food they're eating. They're having the time to think about it, thinking more about health. We're seeing the market share for organic food increase. And if not only because organic is better for you in certain circumstances and offers a value that way, but also because people are really chasing how their food is grown. And therefore, they want to know a little bit more about where it comes from and to make sure that their the footprint, whether it's a water footprint or a GHG footprint from their activities, are resolved there. So we're seeing this pull. The other force is that the cost of organic is going down. As products like ours come onto the market, and as we can work with conventional equipment, i.e. we come out in a pellet that can be used, that allows more farmers to actually get into the market and become organic producers, which drives down the cost of that, or the rarity, scarcity of that in the market. So we're actually making better food more abundant by fertilizing, pardon the pun, but by fertilizing the industry and by providing our products into the market. To date, the organic fertilizer market has been very fragmented and very regional. And what we're looking to do is build a platform. So we can get manure sources wherever there is organic farming. Wherever there's farming, there's livestock being produced. We can create that base formulation. What that's going to allow us to do is to have our base formulation and then build specific products with margin. So we achieve value and accretive value, but allow us to go from 30,000 tons of fertilizer a year to 50,000 tons of fertilizer a year without having to build more facilities, because we can blend in other ingredients that have further agronomic value for our producers. So produce more revenue on the same asset base by driving more and better products into the market that are really well-defined solutions for the local and regional markets that we'll serve. So if we look at the next slide, the plan for us, on the left, you'll see a picture, an aerial view of our existing facility in Strathmore. This facility is going through a bit of a turnaround right now, and that's where we're going to be deploying the capital that we've raised to upgrade the dryers and the pelleting facility and allow us to do a bit more mixing. If you look at the facility, you'll see two big silos to the right, and there's a little rectangle right at the bottom of that, right in the middle bottom of that, and that's the power generation facility. So we produce about 4 megawatts of power. They can go to the grid or run the plant. And the rest of the processing facility fits inside that building that you see there. And those silos are for product storage. So we have the ability on a 25,000 head feedlot where we're currently located to produce about 20 to 25,000 tons of product a year, depending on the blend. We'll then be able to upgrade that to about 40,000 tons as we develop further blends that rely on additional ingredients. The next phase, we've been announcing quite a bit about recently is a production facility to really service the West Coast U.S. market, primarily California, the largest organics production density in North America, and that's the market that we look to be servicing next. So we're looking at building a set of facilities across North America that will allow us to be one of the few, if not the only right now, platform for organic soil amendment products. So fertilizers, biologicals, things that people want to get in the soil to improve soil health, tilth, fertility. That's what we're building. And so we're going to need to build out over the next few years a few of these production facilities. And then the company converts from spending capital to build more projects to leveraging those assets into higher value formulations. So you've seen some of the formulation work we've done recently with biochar, with insect frass, and other ingredients. You'll see more and more of that as we go. Two advantages to EarthRenew. One, our product is such a great binder and to make the pellets, and it's got such a balanced formulation to it already that it's attractive to a number of groups that are trying to get products into the soil. And two, we can use those partners because they're pushing their product. So it allows us to access markets and customers who wouldn't necessarily need our product, but need another product, and therefore we're the carrier of that product. So it allows us to open up more market segments, allows us to become more of a platform for those farmers that will increase the stickiness of the customer and increase the value back to Earth as we drive those customer products forward. So if we advance to the next slide, some pictures of the management team here. We've built a management team designed to be able to execute on this stage of our growth, which is building out projects and getting that product to market. So myself and Ryan, we've got some a good team in the product development and marketing age, and we're going to be bringing on some more experts with specific expertise in formulation and with specific engineering and implementation backgrounds. The other area where we're looking to build the team, and we'll have someone to announce the next little while, is in the marketing department, someone who's got a long history in ag marketing and bringing those products through to market chain. Not that we're selling B2C, but we have to provide the information to our distributors to be able to push that product through the market. So we're not going to rely on them. We're going to build that functionality in-house so that we can drive the development of these product formulas and drive them right through to the customer. So that's the management team there. Next slide, please. And that's the short form story of EarthRenew. What we do better than anyone else is our secret sauce is we can take what is a problem livestock producer, which is their manure. We can process it down into a high value organic fertilizer that is worth multiples of a composted manure product, which is the traditional alternative. And we can provide enough value that it's worth shipping that product to other farmers. Whereas traditionally they would compost that manure and only apply it locally. We can build that market more regionally, and that allows us to extract higher value for that product. And our IP that we have allows us to do that in a way that doesn't require us to run conventional drying equipment or has a huge GHG or water footprint. It allows us to do that in a responsible way.
Excellent. Well, look, that's great, Keith. Thank you very much for that. We've received a number of questions, both from shareholders and interested investors in advance of today's presentation. So I'll work through those with you, and you'll find that a few of those questions you have already addressed in the talk you just gave. But I think it would be good just to sort of zone in on some of the key points that have been asked. So we can emphasise the answers. I've also got a few questions myself about how you're planning to take the company forward both this year and into next year. But let's start with one of the first questions we were asked is, what's the pitch for farmers in all of this? Why would they make their switch from tried and tested chemical fertilizers to organics?
Sure. So if the farmer is moving to organic production or regenerative practices in general, conventional products that they might add to the soil say urea or as a nitrogen source or otherwise, those chemical sprays, they don't qualify for one. So there's a regulatory barrier for using those in organic. But more importantly, those products don't really build the soil. So you apply them, they'll either volatilize or the rain will run them off. And so their utility in the soil over the long term isn't as high as if you can naturally build that nitrogen supply to be available in the soil over time. So for organic farmers, particularly, there's a shorter list of things that they tend to be regionally available. And so for us, this product allows us to move it into markets that are beyond just the local environment, which is great. Opens your available market that you can address. The two provides a long-term solution. So that the nitrogen and the carbon you're putting in the soil today lasts you through next year. You might keep applying it every year, but you're building that soil as opposed to depleting year over year.
So how much risk does a farmer take on? So if they are going to make a switch from their existing fertilizer over to your new product in an industry where obviously crop yield is, the difference between success and failure, are the farmers taking on a risk by changing sort of, let's say, their tried and tested practices?
Not really. Conventional practice would be maybe putting on a composted manure or something along those lines. So it's not as if it's a completely different product. Obviously, we don't compost it, so it's got a higher nutrient value to it, but they can read that on the label. So the NPK, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus components are there. The organic carbon component of it is there, and they would have a budget, much like we may all have a budget for what they need to apply per acre. How many pounds of nitrogen do they need to make sure is available? That's from their side. From our side, it's our job to release information on field trials. So we've done field trials this summer. We just got some results back on those, and they're very promising. But we've been doing field trials for the last 10 years. And what we've been able to show time over time is that our product responds better than the product they're already using. But its essential building blocks are the same as the product they're using. So we're not changing anything dramatically, but the manure has kept its nutrient agronomic value more than if you compost it. And so the product's easier to handle. You need to apply less per acre. So that's the value proposition. It's not a try this, it's entirely different from the other. It's more of a different form of a product they're used to, but with a higher agronomic value, net agronomic value, which means less work and more easily applied.
Excellent. So look, we'll come on to the field trials a bit later on. It'd be very interesting to learn a bit more about that and what you've learned this summer. But just sticking with the product for now, looking through your literature, one of the claims that you make is that your fertilizer can increase a yield between 120 to 145%. Can you tell us a bit more about how you make that possible? And how it's compared to sort of the equivalent chemical fertilizers?
Sure. So within the organic space, as I mentioned before, chemical fertilizers aren't really an option. And if you can apply a high intensity nitrogen source, like a urea product, you can supercharge your crop. The challenge in organic is how do you get that nutrient into the crop, into the soil, so it's available naturally to the plant in a way that meets the requirements for organic certification. And that's where we come in. So there's other products that can be applied, fish hydrolysates and composted manures and things like that, but they don't last the way we do. They don't open up the soil tilth and loosen up the soil the way our product does, and they don't have the same slower release characteristics that we have. And so what we found in field trials is that the production rate is exactly that. It's much higher, typically compared to, say, a base soil condition as it might be, whereas those other fertilizers that they might use to compensate for that low fertility soil are just not available to them anymore when they move over to organic. So they'd have to grow a crop and plow it under and what's called fallowing the field, which is don't produce on the field for a year, grow a crop, till it into the soil, and let it decompose and put those nutrients back in the soil. That's expensive. If you're not producing off that land, it's an expensive proposition. There's a cost to not producing on that land every year. You're still working it, you're still doing all the labor, but there's no crop to value it.
So with your, so obviously you've given us a very good description there of the benefits of the product, sort of what it can do for a farm to help it significantly increase its yield and also increase the use of its land. But in terms of your experience with your Strathmore facility, how has this all translated into your sales pipeline? Is this sales pitch landing with farmers? How much repeat business are you getting?
Yeah, so the field trial program this year was great. We had put the word out to some folks that have used the product previously to see if they'd be interested in participating. We ended up having people one group drove 8 hours to pick up their product for their own field trials. So we're seeing demand there. The challenge we have is that we're going to be producing the first new product out of that facility in the spring of next year. And that means we won't have seen sales this year. We've been providing the product that we had in inventory from previous years to go as we've worked our way through it. So there is that opportunity for us. How we're mitigating that and what we've been doing to do that is we've got distributors that are pulling the product, and we're doing a lot of field trials with specific farmers where, to your earlier question, a farmer's not going to switch everything in 1 year. That'd be risky for them to do. So we're doing little elements where we're doing, say, 10 acres this year for them. Next year, we might get 1,000 acres. And that's important for us because we need those local trials so that people can get their hands on it, understand how it, what its properties are, but also how it handles and how they get that into the soil.
So I suppose in layman's terms, what you're doing at the moment is you're building up a market, you're building up an audience with the product that you have available, so that once you've scaled up your facility and you're able to start creating more products, you've obviously got a ready-made customer base to sell into. Is that a fair enough characterization?
It is, and that market is already using products that they don't particularly value. So using a manure type product is a risk to the business. You're putting a product on the soil that you're not sure of what its performance is going to be because manures vary. It's not mixed, it's not blended, and it's there's the risk of E. coli and otherwise further through the chain. So there's a desire to move off of conventional, and there's actually some regulatory pressure to do so. But at the same time, there's not a lot of other products backfilling that market, and that's where we're sliding in, is positioning ourselves as a safer form of what you already know, with this concept of solution versus ingredient. So solution was, here's a pellet that you can air seed that has everything you want in it, versus an ingredient where you're getting a manure product and you're putting that on, and then you're going to go find some iron product and you're going to spray that on, and you're going to try and do a few things to make it all work. We're going to the solution side of that.
That makes sense. So if we could just pull up the slide which has the commercialization plan on. Because I'd like to ask a question, we can see the picture. So here viewers can see to the left, that's a picture of your Strathmore facility. Now, one of the questions that we were asked in advance was that you stated in one of your April press releases that you're finalising redevelopment plans here at the facility. Could you elaborate on that a bit more and just tell us what success you've had at the facility to date, and perhaps just sort of indicate, where on the picture, the specific parts you're talking about?
Sure. So the changes that we're making are actually fairly well, they're very important to us, but they're fairly subtle to the business itself. The original dryer is being swapped out, and we're swapping out the pelleting equipment because the formulations that we want to aim for require a different pelleting equipment, and so a more reliable pelleting size and consistency. So the building itself isn't actually changing. We're replacing some of the equipment that's in that building, and we're going to put where one of those silos on the right is the top right silo there. We're going to change that configuration around because we're not going to do as much product going out bulk as it is going to go out in super sack. So we're changing a little bit of how we're delivering the product, but otherwise we're not really changing the facility very much. And that's because the facility did run 2010 and 2011 a bit. It ran. And so it's just about modernizing some of that equipment and updating it for the future of EarthRenew, which is blended products as opposed to single base formulation. So that space you see there, that cleared area, is about 5 acres and about 200,000 square feet or 20,000 square meters. And that's essentially the footprint of any type facility like this.
So you talked a bit about just now. You mentioned changing the product configuration. You're going to start, as you say, producing in super sacks. Tell us a bit more about that. Why you're making that change? What customer feedback you've had, and what that will mean for the company moving forward.
For sure. So providing a pelleted product, you're really concerned about the consistency of that pellet because it's going into a very specific piece of equipment that can put that pellet right in the row with the seed. And so if there's any degradation of that pellet, i.e. if we put it in a bulk transport truck and it gets crushed or otherwise. So putting it in super sacks allows us to handle it a little bit differently. So that's just about providing the product to the farmer with a higher level of consistency so that they get more value from the product and they don't have to deal with the dust that comes when it's being processed. So that's where that product form comes. Mm-hmm. Most importantly for us is getting that compaction of the pellet. So no matter what we put in there, we still need to get to a certain hardness of pellet where it doesn't just naturally crumble in your hands. But not so hard a pellet that when you put it in the soil, it won't break down in the soil. So there's a bit of art to that. It's a pretty easy target to hit if you know what you're doing, and there's ready measures of that. And that's why we're moving to this different pellet mill, which we've tested to show that it works, and it'll get us right where we need to go from a hardness perspective that allow that product to make it all the way through the value chain into the farmer's equipment and work reliably in that equipment.
And to what extent do you have to change that product configuration region by region? Because of course we're talking different soil types, sort of different sort of local conditions. You obviously have your Strathmore facility, you have the new partner down in the southwest of the US. How much variation is there between regions?
There's definitely variation between regions. The common metrics that we would look at from our base formula, which is why we really like that, is it's got some nitrogen, it's got some phosphorus, it's got some potassium. It's really high in organic matter, and that's the piece that all soils need that, and then they all need a little bit of those other things. Where we'll find is there'll be soils that need sulfur or need more potash or need something with the insect frass, say, that has some properties that can make crops more resilient. There's those items that they need to somehow get maybe a half ton of that product spread over an acre, which means you have to get it in the soil evenly but very thinly spread. So putting it at a 2% inclusion in a pellet means that you get the right amount in the right place right by the seed all through the field, as opposed to trying to spread it across the whole field and then trying somehow to incorporate that in the soil and expect it to be evenly distributed. So that's where we're seeing that the value come from.
So it's much more targeted distribution of nutrients, obviously, which is, you'd expect, a much more efficient growing process, and obviously makes the farmer's life ultimately much easier because they can get the nutrients packed around the plant essentially.
For sure, and to give you an example, so the biochar blends we've been doing, the interest in the higher biochar inclusion blends, because it does drive the price up to add more of some of these specialty things, is really driven in California, where there's water shortages, and therefore water retention in soil is a key driver, and therefore that functional benefit of the product is worth more to the farmer. So they might want a 20% biochar pellet, whereas in Alberta, they may only want a 4% biochar pellet. So the proportions of these products and the demand for them, base formula is the same. It's just what inclusion, what formula fits for that particular crop, that particular region, and those particular drivers of activity, whether drought or soil fertility or salt or soil pH.
So I suppose if we go back to the commercialization slide, And what you've just described there, if we look at the map of North America on the right, what you've just described, it speaks, I suppose, to your strategy where you're looking at developing regional facilities. So, for example, you already have Strathmore and you have this potential facility in the southwest. And what that enables you to do is to configure your product to those regional, local specifications so that you can provide a final product that meets the local requirements and conditions.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it that we're going to produce probably 70 to 80% of the pellet is the common formulation that we produce. And the rest of the plant is about how do you mix in other things in various proportions and create pellets out of them. So the core business is the same everywhere. So the unit is basically the same, and it's how much are you mixing into those products before you run it through the pelleter. And it's not, there is differences in terms of how you'd handle that product, but the equipment is largely the same. So we can apply the same methodology everywhere, even though the products that the customer locally will want might vary slightly between facilities. And that allows us to, it won't get us quite to customizing by farm, but it'll get us to customizing various product lines that fit within regional markets. And those soil types tend to be fairly consistent within those regions anyway. So Alberta has 2 soil zones, despite being a massive province. There's really only 2 soil zones. So 2 base formulations and then any number of more specific formulations thereafter.
Now, one of the things that I learned sort of doing background research into EarthRenew, which I hadn't, to be honest, really thought about before, but one of the major limiting factors, I should say, for any cattle farmer and dairy farmer is actual is manure disposal. It's not actually, I would have assumed it would be land size. You can only get so many cows to feed off, the land that the farmer owns. But this issue of manure disposal really is a huge challenge across the industry. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how EarthRenew, or how that strengthens EarthRenew's hand to be a partner both to your local facility provider, your facility partner, plus also local farmers in the region who will be obviously providing you with the base product to create your pellets?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about the manure that's being produced at, say, what they call a confined area feed operation or a feedlot, they bring all those nutrients to the site. They feed it to the cows. The cows will produce, call it 100 pounds of manure a day. And that manure's got to go somewhere, because if it concentrates, then you get odors, then you get runoff, you get all these types of problems. So those farmers typically have a land base, land that they own. They might farm it for feed or for other things. And the typical operation is they go take that manure, they store it up, and in the spring and the fall, they work really hard to get it into the field. They have to spread it out on the field, and they have to come out again and incorporate it. So they're spending money to just dispose of that product. What we offer our partner farms is we'll come on site, deliver that waste to us 365 all through the year. We'll take it, process it out into fertilizer, and get it off the land. So we're really a cost saving to those operations. And all of those confined area feed operations, at least in North America and much of the developed world, have to have nutrient management plans. You need to show to the regulators what you're doing with those nutrients. And some have gone to anaerobic digesters, some have gone to composting facilities, some have gone to all sorts of incineration, all sorts of things, or just land application. But those options are getting fewer and fewer, and the economics of them don't pencil against turning it into a high-value organic fertilizer. It just doesn't work. Now, we're not a solution for every farm. Our pitch is we need a farm of suitable size, so 25,000 plus head feedlots, that have this problem where there's enough material to make it worth converting it to organic fertilizer. So, you won't see 1,000 of our facilities out there. That doesn't make sense. We'll see, call it 10 facilities out there at some point that are producing this base formula, and we provide to our site partners a competitive advantage. They don't have the cost of manure disposal. And right now, very few exceptions, it's a cost center where there hasn't been other subsidies.
So that brings us sort of quite neatly into some of your news this summer, where I think back in June, you first announced this potential new partnership with an unnamed partner in Southwest United States that has, I believe, 200,000 head. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah.
So this obviously, that's 8 times the size of Strathmore at the moment. So you've obviously conducted some initial feasibility studies, and you've just recently announced a positive update concerning the results around that. Tell us a bit about the status of that project, what you've learned this summer, and what the next steps are.
Well, it's actually been a really great exercise for us. We inherited the facility in Strathmore, and so some of those decisions around siting and were already made because the infrastructure had already been put in place, and we didn't have to do that. So look, really at this point, what were the regulatory challenges going to be? We knew what the economics would be, and we knew that we would not build a facility there, at least initially, that would take 100% of their manure. So they have more than enough manure for us to run. We'd be able to run, probably 7 or 8 times the size of Strathmore right now, depending on the time of year. And so for us to, grow into that market, it allows us to build multiple trains or multiple modules of the system we already have down there and grow, pardon the pun, but organically in that market where we build a few trains and we'll have the ability to grow back as we go, and grow out as we go. That's important to us. The regulatory hurdles, because we're sort of an industrial type operation on agricultural land, there's some land use issues. We've worked through all of those through the summer here, and actually all quite positively. I think the common value has been we need to find a use for those nutrients. We need to find a solution. So the landowner's been very, very cooperative. The regional permitting facilities have been very clear with us about what to do, and we're going to start those processes just as soon as we lock down the commercial terms of our siting project there. But we're very excited for that. The other piece this has opened up is, we always knew California was the big market for us. We're already engaged in that market, but pricing in that market has looked at other analogous products that are already available. That's been really positive. And the demand cycle in California is 2 to 3 times a year, whereas in Alberta, it's really spring is the big function, and there's a little bit in the fall. In California, there's 3 growing cycles for a lot of crops, so you've got a much more consistent output market, and therefore your sales and your demand cycles and your ability to do trials and your ability to penetrate the market is vastly accelerated. So for us, it's really been a positive experience, and it's I really welcome the opportunity to get active in that California market in the near future.
So obviously you've announced that you expect permitting to take around about 12 months, or to occur over the next 12 months.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that really caught my attention in your most recent, in the June press release, I should say, is you estimated that the total build out for this facility is somewhere in the region of $35 to $40 million. Let's talk a little bit now about sort of how a project like this might get financed. What sources of finance are available to a company like EarthRenew to build out a facility like this one in Southwest United States?
Absolutely. So we've to date been very equity driven in our financing of our activities, and that's just age and stage of the company as we open up the market. So we're pushing more towards firm offtake agreements for product as we look at US Southwest, because our goal is to get to project finance model where we're not having to put substantial amounts of equity into the project from the parent company, EarthRenew, and rather can use things like equipment financing, particularly on the power generation asset, pelleting, and the drying equipment. Those are very common pieces of equipment, obviously configured slightly differently for our application, and that's going to allow us to leverage sources of non-dilutive capital, which shareholder myself and on behalf of the shareholders I represent, which is all the shareholders, it's obviously very accretive for us and some value. So we're going to be fairly cautious about how we develop that project. I don't want to go out and raise 40 million of equity. That wouldn't really be valuable to us as an organization. But we've got lots of interest in that sort of project finance model. Once we can show the Strathmore facility working, which we'll do in 2021, and once we can show pull in the market. So to help do that, we're going to be diverting some of the product from the Alberta facility. And thanks to the low Canadian dollar right now, we can actually ship that product into the California market and achieve the same net value for our product, just based on the capitalizing on the exchange rate and the higher demand in the California market. So things are looking really good for that, and that's how we're going to, maintain or increase incremental value for our shareholders.
So it sounds like you'll be following a similar sort of sales strategy as you have in Alberta, where you'll be shipping product in, existing product that you have from Canada, and look to build up some market share around the Southwest. Again, sort of looking to recruit customers who can do their trial farming, their test farming, make sure they're confident and comfortable with your product. So that obviously once your facility does come online, you've then got, well, however many dozens of potential regional, large farms ready to take your product and put it and apply it to their soil. So that sales strategy, I mean, that certainly makes a lot of sense. If we could just pull up the share price chart at the moment to take a look at. So obviously, we're looking here at a six-month chart, and back at the end of May, one of the big drivers for your stock re-rate was when you announced some changes to your pellet reformulation. Obviously, things have stabilised since then, and you've raised the first tranche of 2 million Canadian dollars at 30 cents, with another expected 3 million to come. What do you see as the drivers for your stock price over the next 12 months?
Sure. So I think we've got to get past this financing, because that's I think anchoring that share price at 30 cents, which is fine. The big jump was really us moving from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 1 was getting the power generation going and proving that model out, and getting the second phase now is getting these pellets and the marketing going. Upon closing the financing, moving ahead with US Southwest project, but also you'll see us really positioning that product for our distributors. So bringing on more distributors, bringing on more formulation partners. And the key thing to note is each of these formulation partners, so it went a bit under the radar when we announced with, say, Biochar Now. The reason that relationship works really well for us is they're out there selling their product, and we're just the producer of the pellet that includes their product. So we're effectively, they're selling for us, and they're pushing product for us. And we don't have to produce that product until they give us the demand for that particular blend. So we're able to empower those that are already in the supply chain, those that are already moving products that are having a hard time. So biochar, it's really messy to apply if you apply it as 100% product broad acre. So you need something to put it in, and we're just that something. And so for them, they're selling to the same customer they've always been selling, but now they have a different formulation and product form to be able to sell it to, which is going to be easier for their customer. They're responding to their customers' needs. So those are the types of things I think are going to drive value. For us, getting that product up, we recognize that getting to sales in 2021 and showing that is going to be critical. And the things we can do now, the leading indicators we can give the market, are distributors and product formulations, because those are the elements that get pulled in the market and aren't just being pushed. And you'll see that throughout the fall as our field trials end, and as we turn our attention more to marketing and positioning for the 2021 growing season.
Right. So obviously, we just looked there at the slide that shows us if we could return to the slide of industry overview. So once you can start to talk about customers that you've recruited, the size of market here really is absolutely immense. So to talk us a bit through that and tell us who is your competition at the moment. What does the competitive landscape look like?
Sure. So the competitive landscape is surprisingly fragmented. So typically organic products, because they can't really be processed very much and stay in the organic, tend to be very localized. So you've got a number of local favorites, but lots of it's composted product, and a lot of it is grow a crop that's, say, nitrogen fixing, and plow that back into the field and fallow the field for a year every 3, 4, 5 years, which if you think about it means you can only generate revenue in the other years where you're not fallowing. So it really does, this does cause a problem. But the formulation, the demand for that product, the transition to regenerative agriculture, where we're seeing those soils that are depleted year over year, is driving that up. So our competitors right now, there's a couple of them out there. They're priced at what I would say is somewhere between 50 to 100% more than our wholesale price at a retail level, which is good. It means we're well positioned price wise. But they have yet to establish the geographic footprint. So we're seeing players in individual markets that seem to be gaining some speed. And it's up to us, I think, to get into those markets and provide a product across them that is consistent. So we look at competitive products, we seek to order them to find out, get price discovery in the marketplace. We talk to our customers and our distributors, and we know the price is right. The challenge is distribution. And if you have to ship it halfway across the country, the value that you can achieve in the market goes down proportionally. So we know we need to get into those regional markets to build the platform that allows us to lock in that value across the broader market.
So you've talked a lot about the regional markets that you're targeting. Tell us about the scope for international markets and taking your model and applying it in other major cattle areas around the world.
Yeah, so we get inquiries all the time. Manure management is a ubiquitous problem, and that tends to be who comes knocking for us is folks who have manure management problems. Where our sweet spot lies is in places where there is both that and a high demand for organic products. So we're looking at Europe, particularly as you move more towards Eastern Europe, where you have a concentration of agricultural production that's looking to meet the food needs of the country, but at the same time has land and the other elements that are required for them. So the regulatory and the market regimes are we understand them quite well here in North America, and we've been looking for how do we partner to enter into a European market where we won't necessarily understand all the same organic certification, drivers, market demand components, but at the same time, we know that the macros are there, and it's just trying to find a partner over there who could manage the micro segmentation challenges that would allow us to really hone in on a site. Europe's a big place, and the opportunity is going to be somewhere in and amongst those regimes, those countries.
So if we just move back to the production process slide, one area that we haven't talked about so far is, of course, the electricity production. Now, obviously, your primary focus is on the pellets. That is, your primary product. That's what the business is really structured around. But of course, another valuable aspect of what you do is the generation of power and through the heat turbines. Tell us a bit more about the process and the benefits that your partner farmers receive from this.
For sure. So it all comes down to behind the fence power production. So for us, we produce 4 megawatts of power. We need about 1.5 megawatts of that power to run our equipment, which means we have 2.5 megawatts of power at production cost that we can use. And so our on-site partners, we're co-located with the feedlot. We can tie into their grid and give them power at a rate that's lower than if they were buying it off the grid. We can also contribute it to the grid. So we're a fertilizer company with an electricity problem. And so we look for places and scales of operation where, say in Alberta, if you're under 5 megawatts of net production, which we are, we can contribute that to the grid and we get whatever the price on the grid is. So the advantage of that is it drives down the spark spread on the natural gas to power allows us to hit our cover our costs of producing the power. So we can produce fertilizer with zero cost for the heat that we get from it. So we attribute all the cost of natural gas to the power generation. So that business, makes sense. 50% margin so far this year for us, but if we were to average it over the years, about 15% that we'll make on the power. But then we have this source of heat for free. And we can use that as an incentive for our local farmer who might need or want to lower their power costs, but it also allows us to have that consistent form of revenue. Every month we're producing power, we're putting it on the grid, and we're getting paid for that. So it really gets rid of those costs that would otherwise be a drag to the business.
Fantastic. So Keith, we're sort of coming to the end now of this production. So to round off, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about the company's runway. Once you've closed the full $5 million raise, how much runway does that give the business? How far does that take you down the line?
Yeah, that's going to get us through to production in 2021. And that's really the marker for us, is getting to the point where we've got sustaining revenues that can drive the growth of the business. It'll validate all the efforts to date and really sort of get us to the point where we're quote unquote self-sufficient from a capital perspective for ongoing operation. So we're pretty excited to get this financing closed. As you can imagine, it's a lot of work, particularly in COVID times. But once complete, it's going to set our runway up here for the better part of a year to go up and run that. Obviously, when we look at a project in U.S. Southwest, there'll be some capital needs around that, but that's going to be very accretive to the business, and I don't think that's going to be a problem for us at the time.
So really, from an investment point of view, which of course is the reason we're talking today, once you've secured that financing, that really should be not only a catalyst for growth, but it really puts a foundation, a floor in place for the business to move forward to not only being sustainable, but actually profitable in the long run.
Yeah, and because each of our facilities after this are so replicable, it really will validate the sort of earnings potential as we grow the business. So we're excited to see that, obviously, and to demonstrate that and be able to share that with our shareholders, that the market is responding, and some of our assumptions about that market and the market pull are validated. We expect to see that within the next 6 to 12 months.
So it's exciting times ahead for the rest of this year. Obviously, we need to get out of this bloody lockdown situation that we're all in at the moment. Yeah. The future, sort of as you move into next year, really is looking bright.
Yeah, it is, and I have to acknowledge the impact of COVID has been probably hard on financing, but it has really brought to bear the drivers for our business. No matter what happens, economies collapse to some degree, but people still need to eat and need a source of reliable food. And so the agri-food sector has largely chugged along. There are, of course, exceptions, but it's been a great space to be in, and I feel really fortunate to be at a real inflection point here with this business, but also with the sector in general.
Excellent. Well, look, Keith, thank you very much for your time today. It was a really interesting presentation, and thank you for giving us such direct answers to all of our questions. So all we have to say now is we wish you best of luck for the rest of this year.
Thank you very much, man. Talk soon.
Thanks.